Hey there, welcome to the Posit Data Science Hangout. I'm Libby Heron, and this is a recording of our weekly community call that happens every Thursday at 12 p.m. US Eastern Time. If you are not joining us live, you miss out on the amazing chat that's going on. So find the link in the description where you can add our call to your calendar and come hang out with the most supportive, friendly, and funny data community you'll ever experience. Can't wait to see you there. I think that with that, I am ready to introduce our featured leader today. We have Dave Gruenewald at Centene. Dave, could you introduce yourself? Tell us your full long title, what you do, and something you like to do for fun.
Hey, yeah, sure. It's such an honor to be joining on this channel here on the Hangout. So yeah, my name is Dave Gruenewald. I am in Oak Park, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. My title is Senior Director of Data Science at Centene. My focus is specifically on the Affordable Care Act space, or Obamacare, as others might know it. Yeah, I guess for fun. I'm always into finding kind of obscure new music or movies. I've lately been picking up the banjo, so that's been kind of a fun new hobby of mine. Yeah, really looking forward to all of your questions and just the conversation today.
Yay. And we have actually several people in the data science hangout family that are from Centene. Javier is here, and his camera is on, so you might be able to see him. Javier is at Centene. Javier has been here. Catherine Gerton is also at Centene, and she has been a speaker on the hangout. I don't know if she's here today. She usually doesn't have camera on, but maybe she's here. Um, Catherine's here. Yay. Okay. Hey, Catherine. So Centene family is here, even though they're all from different departments. I am totally aware. All right, in order to get us started, Dave, I would love you to help us build a little context around the type of data that your teams underneath you use. So we're all from different industries. We all work with completely different data types, and data sources. Can you give us a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, I don't think we're any exception there. We have a lot of different sources. So we are using data that's publicly available from like the government CMS. We house a lot of internal data on multiple different databases. We have both Snowflake and Databricks. And we do a lot of our kind of ingestion using kind of our Studio or VS Code and then host a lot of that, our data science products, if you will, onto Posit Connect. So we're kind of living and breathing in this Posit ecosystem. And I think it really does facilitate the work that we do. Um, I think with any sort of data science work, I've kind of always viewed it as three different pillars, more or less, where I think the machine learning and modeling and AI is one of those pillars. But I think equally as important is going to be kind of the actual data science product, whether that's like a dashboard or a report. I'm going to call that just like the data science storytelling. And then the final component that I like to focus on is just process improvement and automation. There's so much that we can do with code that sometimes it's I guess I always refer to it as treadmill work, where you're kind of sprinting in place but never really getting progress. And so a lot of what I like to focus on is how do we automate this treadmill work where we can, so that we can kind of focus on the actual fun problems that data science can help solution for.
Yeah, the fun problems. And lately I've been sort of like offering up some topics that I know that our guests like to talk about. And I think that's something really funny from when I was prepping with you, Dave, was that there are these topics that I was like, oh, these are sort of like vague general topics. I wonder how Dave is going to talk about them or what he's going to find exciting about them. And then when I listened to you talk about them, I was so enthralled. I was like, yes, I am in such agreement with all of these things. Let's talk about this forever. Let's do a 4-hour podcast. Um, so, so I want to touch on just a few of those. One of them from Dave was data science best practices, which is a very broad phrase, right? Um, but he let me know like this is about speaking the same language, the same baseline language. And you said that even if two R devs or two Python devs are working in the same language, they're going to have different things that they do, right? That like make it harder for them to work together or for the team to work together. So you want to be able to have sort of a unification of standards and formatting and styles and stuff. I would love to talk about that. Somebody ask Dave a question about that, or I will. There was also enterprise package development and dashboard development. Like, hey, maybe developing an internal package for your team or your org sounds like a really big lift or it sounds really nerve wracking, but it's a really great thing. And Dave can talk about that and how it really helps with reproducibility. But the things that I really want to talk about, one of them was right sizing development efforts. I am somebody who's going to over optimize too early. It's a sickness. And I think that many people in data science want to do that as well. And Dave can talk about making the right amount of effort for the right projects. And then the big one, which I know a lot of people want to talk about, is working in a polyglot team and really developing, managing, facilitating a polyglot team. Um, all of the different ways that you can work together as an R plus Python or Python plus something else team. Um, so I'm really excited to talk about all of those. We are we always wait just a minute while questions roll in, but we have some questions already. And Zach had asked one that I will go ahead and ask for him because it's got an asterisk. Thanks, Zach. Which of these three pillars you mentioned is your personal favorite to work on?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think learning is going to be like more associated with the like modeling machine learning. I think that is very fun and it's really cool to make predictions. So I think there's like some immediate gratification with that. The maintenance of those long-term models that are in production may be a little bit less fun, if I'm being totally honest. And so I think the process automation is probably more what I lean on because I think each type, anytime I'm in a project like that, I find that there are way more creative opportunities on how to make something work. And I think what's really neat in that space is being able to figure out what are the right tools for the job and how do you make sure that you don't over-engineer or under-engineer kind of a solution there. So I think I lean more towards that. I also think that being in a rather larger company, there is plenty of opportunity for kind of this type of automation and just generalized process improvement. So I think that's actually just like where I get more of my long-term satisfaction. But it's really hard to decouple all three because almost every project touches on at least two, if not all three of those pillars.
Yeah, it's like a stool with three legs. It can't have
Yeah.
less than that, fewer than that. Thank you for the question, Zach. Noor, you asked a question. I feel like Noor asks really great opening questions, and so I end up wanting to throw Noor into the ring early. Noor, are you available to ask yours live? We have to go find Noor and unmute her. So hold on, Noor.
Hello, here am I entering the ring center stage. That's all the wrestling terminology I know. So, my it's a more of a broad question, but I know as a data scientist and training slash data scientist, one of the things that always comes to mind is scope creep. It's like, how do you avoid it or divert it? Because you're like, oh, if I do this, I can like save myself time. Then you're like encroaching. It's like this is not the plan at all. So like, how do you avoid it? I divert it. Given your experience, any tips or advice?
Yeah, no, that's a great question that even the simplest of projects can have scope creep. One of the things that we've done that I think has helped with that is at the start of any bigger project, we do a lot of our planning in GitLab, but GitHub also is an option. There's a lot of like project planning tools in your version control platforms. So if you're not using version control, please do it. If you are using it, please use the planning features. But one of the things that we do with that is I have a template that we use that is basically let's state the problem, let's state the proposed solution, And then what are the potential rabbit holes of like, as you're working on this project, you will likely come across this issue. Has it already been solved, or is it something that we should just avoid entirely? And then finally, we'll have another section on there called no-goes. And what that is like, hey, it doesn't matter if somebody asked for this or not. This is totally out of scope of this project. And we're making that known like up front. And so that could be like, hey, if we're doing some process automation, that's not a dashboard project. Let's make those two separate projects. And once we kind of have refined what this kind of storyboard looks like, we'll actually give it in front of our stakeholders so that they can say, yeah, actually, this seems like a really good plan. Or actually, what if we pivoted this? Maybe it's not like answering the question that we actually want. I think a lot of those project requests that we get is if you've ever had any experience with Stack Overflow, you read the question and then you understand what's the question that they're actually getting at. And I think by doing some project planning up front, you're able to better craft of a solution that's like maybe they didn't ask the question exactly how it should have been. And so this is a little bit of an opportunity for discovery without much overhead and also keeps you on target for what you're going for.
I love it. My follow-up question is, how much of the project should be planning before any code happens? Like before any code is typed? What
It's
proportion?
that's a tough question because I've also seen plenty of teams that spend too much time in the planning phase and not enough time in the doing phase. And so I don't really have a solid answer of like, oh yeah, you should always spend 10% of your time planning. Because some projects that are small end up taking more planning, and sometimes big projects are pretty self-explanatory. Um,
Right.
and so I think it is worth I would say never do a project in total isolation if you can avoid it. And so by just bouncing ideas off of a colleague or even your stakeholder, I think you're going to have a better product and a more well-defined scope than just kind of jumping straight into coding. I think like, I'm not an artist, but I would also assume that I'm not going to just get some paint and just go at it. I would have a plan. I would do a sketch, a mock-up. And I think coding is very much the same. It's much easier to do planning work than it is to actually put it to code. And so by having like I want to say more of a skeleton because you don't want to over engineer it. And there's always going to be, some hangups or maybe some things take shorter time or more time than expected. But you should have like that roadmap kind of carved out. And now that you have that, it's more of just putting those thoughts into code rather than
Right.
kind of coding and figuring out where you're going with it.
Yeah, I think LLMs have probably changed this development cycle a little bit because the way that I have always worked and taught as well before LLMs at least, and still now kind of, is like write your script in pseudocode first. But you plug your code in later, but like write down your plan for what you're going to do in pseudocode, which is just plain language, comments and stuff, and go from there. And but now with LLMs, do you feel like people are just hopping in and going, "Hey LLM, make me a POC," and then they work from that like it's their blank canvas? Yeah. I don't know if there's
Yeah,
an answer to that.
no, I mean, I think that is like actually a pretty phenomenal use of AI, just to kind of ideate and help lead what direction you're going in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there's an anonymous question that was sort of along the lines of this that we can tack on. And it is, do you give them what they say they want, or do you give them what they need? And how do you approach that conversation?
That is a very good question. And I think it really depends on your prior relationship with whatever stakeholder you're working with. And if you have that working relationship, obviously, you should try to actually create a solution that you think is the best solution possible. Um, I mean, really, this feels more like a question about communication. And while I think the planning phase is important, I think it's also good to just have some check-ins throughout the process. If you're going to be working for something, say, for 6 weeks,
Hmm.
It seems kind of crazy to just keep your head down, work on something, and pour your heart and soul into it. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, realize it's either not needed anymore or what you built wasn't really answering the question at hand. And so I do think that um, uh, you don't need to be over communicative, but I think just the occasional check-in on a weekly cadence or bi-weekly cadence to say, hey, this is where we are, this is where we're heading, is
Right.
really going to make sure that you're answering those questions.
Are we still going in the right direction?
Yeah.
Directionality check. All right, that was a great question, anonymous asker. Joey, I saw you had a question. Can we help Joey unmute to ask his question live? Joey Marshall, in case there's more than one Joey.
Hey, um, and hey Dave, thanks for hanging out with us. My audio's on, yeah?
Yeah, we
Yes.
hear you, Joey. Thank you.
Cool, perfect. Um, hey, I'm Joey. I'm a data scientist at the Census Bureau. Um, you mentioned using a lot of public data in your work. Um, we at the Census Bureau, we're still here despite kind of a year with some disruption. And we're still innovating and we're eager for people to use our data, especially because when people use our data, including in the private sector, it really demonstrates to everyone how important official statistics are. I'm wondering, what data do you wish existed, like public data that doesn't? And it could be anything like health, demographics, climate, it could be geospatial data. We want to make stuff that people use, and we are still, trying to innovate with official statistics. So yeah, can you just like sort of dream up, what data do you wish you had?
Y- Yeah, that's a good question that I wish I was way more prepared for. I will say one challenge that we do have is actual data access. And sometimes that we see again, not just with any external vendor, there's not a lot of regulation about kind of that data governance layer. Are the columns consistently the same? Are the data types the same? Is this being served as an Excel file? One thing that has been incredibly helpful is when those external data sources are willing to like create like an API access so that we can programmatically get that data. And so I know I'm not answering your question directly, but I am from my own, you know, uh, perhaps own interest here, is what we've spent a lot of time on is scraping websites and downloading it and then doing a lot of data engineering internally. But it would be phenomenal if that database was like accessible outside of us doing that legwork. Um, and so yeah, I don't have a great like feel free to put it in the chat here if anybody does have strong opinions of missing data elements. But to me, I think one of the things that would really help is just more of a unified approach to data management.
Yeah, so say we all. I don't want to scrape anything. I want it all completely available via an API. I see a bunch of like nodding heads in there. Um, yes, thank you for the great question, Joey. Um, all right. We had an anonymous question that was like, hey, you mentioned VS Code in our studio. Why did you not mention Positron? It's great. I love that this question says, I don't work for Posit, but I've been using it for almost a year now, and I love it. Um, I will say a lot of companies are using what they have for an enterprise tool available. And so maybe they're waiting for Positron to be available. How about you guys, Dave?
Yeah, we currently don't have Positron implemented, but we do have a kind of centralized resource that hosts our studio and VS Code and Jupyter notebooks, kind of all in one unified platform. It's the equivalent of Posit Workbench, and I think that is so critical if you're a team of more than one. Mainly because, it's called data science for a reason, and I'm going to emphasize science. Part of science is reproducibility. And if I'm writing code and running code on my system, I I would expect that you would not need to modify that code base and still be able to run that code and come to the same conclusions as what I saw. And so I think having a centralized kind of data development or data science development platform is kind of critical for any sort of collaboration. Even if you're using the same language and you've already figured out how to work seamlessly as a team. Unless you're working in the exact same environment, you're going to have a lot of unneeded friction.
Yeah. Can we like follow this line of the data science best practices? Like, let's say I have a team of 4 devs and they're all working in R, but they all come from different backgrounds. Maybe one of them is hardcore tidyverse, maybe one of them is hardcore base R. Maybe they're all tidyverse, but they all write in a different style. How do you unify as a team and make it so that I can always read everybody else's code, they can always read mine?
Yeah, yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. I think the low-hanging fruit there is just kind of agreeing upon a style, which seems kind of pedantic, but you'd be surprised how many hot button topics you run into when you do that. Um, but I think the goal there is anytime that you are reading somebody else's code, you're gonna have some unfamiliarity with what they're doing. Why make it more challenging with it also being like an unfamiliar style or syntax or like unique packages that you're not familiar with? And so I think coming up with a familiar style guide that you all are comfortable with is a great starting point. But that's not the end of the conversation. I think it's also what are like almost gold carded packages, if you will, where it's like, yes, of course we'll use this package. What are some that you're like, actually, yes, I see the benefits, but let's try to avoid it if we can. Mainly because while the open source community is amazing at creating new content, there's also a wide array of how these packages are used and what that like format and syntax looks like. And so I think it's a little bit of just refining what are you focusing on. But the goal here is not to like, I'm not negating the individual, but I should be able to look at any one of my team members' code and not be able to identify which person wrote it because we're all in a unified kind of format and style of how we're writing our code. That gets more challenging when you have R and Python and maybe Julia if you're a go-getter here. But I think that within those languages, there's still some familiarity there that like you should adhere to.
Yeah, there I saw a question pop up in the chat as you were talking about that that was like, what if it's R and Python? Like, is there a unified style guide that's going to work for everybody? In that case, I think that's a lot bigger challenge. But this does lead us into um, some sort of like questions about R and Python together and how that works. I know that a lot of people at Centene use R, but you do have Python users too. Could you talk a little bit about how that works together?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in this day and age, it's more about use the tools that you're comfortable and familiar with. I don't really want to prescribe, no, this has to be in Python, this has to be in R, unless there's an actual platform limitation that kind of forces our hand there. Um, but where I think that like the expectation that if you're an incoming Python developer or an incoming R developer, you shouldn't be the expectation that you also are like an expert in the other language that you don't know. I think LLMs are actually a great example of leveling that playing field of just using it to refactor some of your code. That's not always an option. And so I think one of the things that's worked out really well for us is the different types of, I mean, Posit has actually provided a lot of examples of this. I'm going to talk about Quarto, where you can seamlessly run R and Python code kind of in the same report, being a little bit more language agnostic. So I think that's a great example. I think another thing that we do a lot of is, again, I'm making up a lot of terms here, but I'm going to call it a data science checkpoint, where say I'm running a process in R and now I've got my output. Let's save it as a Parquet file that now R or Python can use. And so you're kind of, yes, I'm running my process fully in one language, but now I'm saving the output so that any other language can now use that. And you can host that, say, in, again, on pins and Posit Connect or an S3 object, Databricks or Snow. I mean, you have so many different options, but making sure that your colleagues and the other language can still access that is kind of important. And then finally, I think APIs are still criminally underutilized, of creating your own REST API and hosting that. And so that way I can run Python code even though I'm only an R developer, or I can run a R process that's hosted on, say, a Plumber API. But being able to access that through Python is kind of a game changer. Um, and then, going on down that list, there's also reticulate is always an option. I will be honest, that's kind of always our final process rather than like what we start off with. And then I actually just saw on the Tidyverse blog, there's a nanonext just was released. And that seems very
Yeah.
promising on, again, just kind of being able to operate with other teams and whatever language they choose.
This is actually something that just came up with our data science hangout crew. Last night we were all talking about it. We're all online going, "Oh my gosh, have you seen nanonext? What's happening?" Um, so I feel like it's still so new that we're all like reading through the examples and going like, "Oh, I have questions." But let me put something in the chat so that we all know what we're talking about. Actually, maybe like Joey or Javi, do you have the link that you could share um, about nanonext so that other people can read about it? I want to say that at a really high level, nanonext is going to be a way to pass information between R and Python, not using reticulate, and having it be like an open and closed connection. I have a lot of questions still, but it sounds really, really promising. So everybody go check that out. I was going to see if maybe Charlie was on the Hangout today in the crowd, but I don't think that he is. All right. I want to hop over to Slido. Hey, everybody, ask questions in Slido. Don't forget, Bridget has put the link, that pos.it/dsh dash questions. There was a question about how to start package development with a team who are very new to package development. Um, this is a fantastic question. I find package development awe-inspiring myself. I've taken a workshop on it, but I feel like if I'm on a team of people who don't have a package already, I'd be reticent to like raise my hand.
Yeah, I think I just thinking back to whenever I've kind of first started my data science career, I kind of always viewed package development as almost these like coding gods that are the purveyors of how code is run and like who's pushing the envelope the most. And I'm not diminishing that. I mean, I still think there's just like phenomenal packages developed out there, but they've also almost like Promethean captured the flame and brought it to us. There's so many tools that make the learning curve of getting started with package development so easy. If you're in R, you've got dev tools and use this, which do a phenomenal job of kind of hand holding and making sure that you are like creating that package skeleton correctly and how to use documentation. I think it does a really good job of rewarding you for sticking to those standard conventions, without it being like you have to hit every single thing perfectly to have something working. So, like with all things, let's not start totally complex. Start with kind of what's code that I just constantly am copying and pasting between projects, and how do I just get that wrapped up into a function so that it's rather than copying and pasting 50 lines of code, what if I just write a single line of code with three arguments? Um, so I think if we're talking R, the R package book that I think we're on the second edition now. If you do nothing else, just read that one chapter called The Whole Game. And I think that gives you
Mm-hmm.
a phenomenal bird's eye view of what's going on. And then you can use the rest of the chapter as you kind of need to. Again, this is just like if you're really feeling discouraged from starting, that's like a really easy starting point.
Yeah.
Um, and then
Also,
poetry
oh, go
within
ahead.
Python, I think, is just another
Okay,
great
perfect.
framework. So yeah, like there's options for both, and I think the overhead for poetry is actually pretty low. So I would recommend checking that out if you haven't.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say. I was like, wait, it's not just R. Let's cover, you can do the same thing in Python. Also, I will say, if you have something that you're using over and over again and somebody else needs to use it over and over again, some like really tiny step towards this, like I'm going to share my functions with other people. If you have a private repo where you can get on GitHub and just like host a .r or a .py file to share with other people, they can use the raw link to that file in GitHub to source. So like you can literally type in your R code source and then put in the URL to that .r file in GitHub, and you will source the functions that are stored in that, right? Like maybe that could get you over the hump of being nervous about it, being like, are my things that I'm developing useful to other people? They probably are. And then if people use them and like them, you know, like, okay, I can go make an R package out of this, and people will find it useful.
I would actually even say a great starting point is creating a package that uses your company theming.
Oh
That gives
yeah.
you like immediate buy-in from your stakeholders because it's like, oh, this follows the same company colors. It has our logo on it. You know, it's like small things like that, but that instantly builds trust with your stakeholders and makes it feel like it's a more polished, finished product. And you know, the stress of writing a theming package is pretty low. So if you do maybe make a mistake, it's not going to be, oh no, the like our company's stock is halved now. It's very low stakes, and I think it's a
It's very low
great
stakes.
exploration of how to actually do package development.
Yeah, I think there was a talk at PosiConf in 2023. My friend Camila, who's at Dow, I think one of her things that she started with was like, well, I could make a ggplot theme package that follows Dow's style guides. Um, and that's a great segue into just like building tools for your company. Fantastic. All right, let's head over to Slido. What do we have here? Thank you very much for that anonymous question. I saw that Marlene asked a question that's very heavy hitting. We always ask at least one career question, career advice question. Marlene, would you like to unmute and ask your question? But there are several follow-ons to this, which are like, you know, you could also mention as well, especially Arsenis's.
Sure. Hi, Dave. And feel free
Right.
to parlay the question as well, because it's not a fun one. Um, but what's your greatest regret career-wise? Huge caveat, guys. I am a big fan of like we got to where we're supposed to be right now, despite our stumbles and our falls and our failures. So please don't take this really as a negative thing, but it is nice to look back sometimes career-wise and say like, God damn it, if I had done this one thing, right? Or if I hadn't, I don't know, flipped off my boss, whatever that thing is. So that it was kind of one of those framed questions. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'll give you my totally honest answer, which is like I still really love ecology and I wish I was in that field. But unfortunately, like career and the society we live in, that just wasn't in the cards for me. So I do kind of like still just kind of look out like a kid with his hand on the window in the rain, looking at some ecology work. But I would say advice that I can give rather than like actually I can't say I'm like swimming in regret with career, but one thing that I will say is that don't like do not burn bridges because it is crazy how often that actually does come into play. So I actually was at Centene. I left for a another work. Actually, I worked at Posit for a year, and then I ended up coming back to Centene. And so I think that's a lot of just one of many examples of how keeping doors open is probably the best thing that you can do for your career.
I love it. When Ralph Asher was on, he talked about preserving optionality. And I think that that really is along these lines, right? Like, it's one of the reasons why, not just career wise, but like I live in a very inexpensive house in a very inexpensive area and I drive a very old car because I am preserving my optionality. Because if I lived in a fancy house in a fancy area with a fancy car, I would not have as many options as I do in life for making decisions or changes. All
And
right.
I'll also add, like, I mean, I was also in a PhD program that I ended up dropping out. I have no regrets about that. I don't think it was a great fit for me, and I'm like
Yeah.
happier with what I'm doing now. And so I know at the time though that was very stressful and like felt like a very dramatic decision to be made. And now being years away from that, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, that was actually the right call, and I'm glad I did that.
Yeah. You're not alone. There's many, many people in the data science hangout space who stopped their PhD or just sort of pivoted or mastered out, like whatever it is. I considered a PhD for a while and I was like, I just don't think that this is for me. Nessa says they dropped out of a PhD program as well. Yep, I know there's lots of us. Well, Arsenis had an add on to this, which was what about your biggest wins? And he specifically said in your early career. Were there
Yeah.
any things that were like big wins that led you in the right direction?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was, I mean, I guess, again, speaking from personal experience here, coming from ecology and then pivoting into data science, knowing it, and like knowing how I did a lot of modeling and coding in grad school, it felt like a pretty like within reach, but I do feel like it was a tough kind of inch like career pivot to break into. And so I think a lot of that was how do I take what I like professionally have on my resume and kind of shape that up to look like, yeah, I am a data scientist. I am capable of doing this work. And so it wasn't just like, all right, went straight from ecology into data science. I did work in public health for a little bit at the CDC, and then I worked as a statistician for a children's hospital. And then slowly but surely, that kind of lent itself towards doing more of the work that I actually wanted to do. And so part of that was taking gigs that maybe I was doing more Excel work, but I was able to just kind of do coding off to the side for some of those more challenging opportunities. And so I think it was a little bit of a kind of a juggling act of both doing what was requested of the job and then making sure that I was doing other parts of my job in the way that I wanted to keep developing. Because, in some of those roles, I was the only coder on the team. And that does kind of make it challenging to make sure that coding is a part of your like career trajectory. So I would say that I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I do think that was probably the better thing that I've done in my career is actually making sure that I had uh, it's not so much show up for the job that you want, but like how do you kind of force your job to grow in what you want to grow in?
I love it. And I'm seeing so much in the chat. I say I love it to every single thing. It's the worst. You guys give me other things to say besides I love it. There's lots of conversation in the chat. People raising their hands saying, "Hey, I too dropped out of a PhD program. Hey, I too mastered out." And we're talking about how we need a different word than dropout because it's not a great it's not a great term. Can people suggest something else? I suggest pivot. And George had said, like, hey, there's that popular book, Know When to Walk Away. And I know that there are actually some data science hangout people who have been reading that this year. I have not read it. If you have, let me know if you like it. I'm a big proponent of walking away and really understanding the sunk cost fallacy as well. Like, just because you've put a bunch of time into it doesn't mean that you should keep doing it. Um, Oh, Aaron says not dropping out, just reallocating your resources. I love that. Reallocating your life resources. Fantastic. All right. Well, there was an anonymous question that I wanted to ask. It's quite long. Um, and it says, I am a chemist who has become a self-taught data scientist, R Python SQL, in an R&D organization with an old school mindset. When I try to get people to structure their data, I meet a lot of resistance. How would you recommend building a data science culture and community from scratch?
Yeah, great question. I wish I could say that challenge goes away. It does not. But I think it's more of think of it more of like a stick and carrot approach of, okay, if you were to do this and that kind of scratches my back, what is the benefit for you? And I think it's showing them like, okay, normally this work takes me 80% of my day is just cleaning that data before I can even start the analysis. If you are able to organize your data, we can get a lot more productivity. I can focus more on like the exciting projects of like actually answering these new questions and driving the business forward or driving your research forward, rather than spending your time with that data cleaning and cleanup. There'll always be some data cleanup, so let's just be honest there. But like, how do we minimize that effort? Because at the end of the day, I'll classify that as non-value add work, because it's cleaning data doesn't necessarily answer any questions. It's just the necessary step before you can start answering questions. So you always want to minimize what is your non-value add work. And I think communicating with that, but also showing them exactly what would be the benefit to them to do this is kind of your ticket. And that might be received well, that might not. But I think the more that you can make it clear why they should and make it as easy as possible for them on why they should is just kind of going to be your best path forward.
I'm not going to say I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for that question. And we will stop speculating, Mike, in the chat about who asked that anonymous question. There was a quick question that I thought we could cover rapid fire since we only have 12 minutes left. And that is, would you set a specific timeline for EDA, exploratory analysis, to scope the project better? And that's related to something that I asked earlier on, which was like, how much should be the non-coding part? But this is actually the coding part, right? Where you're exploring.
Yeah, I would almost wrap that as kind of the weird no man's land between project planning and getting the project work done. Because if you're not doing any of that quality control or just data exploration, you're likely going to just have either invalid answers or you're going to draw conclusions that you shouldn't be drawing. So yeah, absolutely. Any project that you do, you should be familiar with, what are the nuances and biases of the data that you're working with. I think that really is just going to fit based on what is the like severity and priority of the project that you're working on. Uh, Depending on that answer, it kind of depends on how much time and effort you put up front. But it, I can't imagine doing a data science project where you're not also exploring the database for missing values or weird duplication or what have you.
Yeah. My 2 cents is the whole thing is EDA. Like, there are things you are not going to figure out about your data until you start modeling it. And you're like, oh, wow, wish I had figured this out in EDA. But it turns out modeling the data is like a really fantastic way to find things out about it, right? And then, yeah, you might go on exploratory journeys where you're like, oh man, I really thought that that variable represented that thing. And it turns out in that database, it doesn't. And there's somebody in a back office somewhere who's going, haha, yeah, don't use that variable. That doesn't do what it says it does. And you're just not going to know until you get through your process. But that is your chance to document that somewhere so that the person after you doesn't um, chase that same wild goose, I guess. Thank you so much for that question, anonymous asker.
I guess on that note, I would add on that it's probably smart to have some sort of knowledge share. Like we have a Quarto knowledge share where anytime we find out weird nuances like that, it just becomes a post in our Quarto blog, to basically make sure the whole team is aware. Hey, this database is a little bit odd, right? Like this is how I
Right.
would recommend doing it.
Or like, hey, we have that variable called that thing, but it doesn't actually do that thing, and it's not that granularity or whatever it is. Or that's an old variable, and now we're using this other one that's not named as intuitively. That happens all the time. A lot of people that use like Confluence or wikis and things like that. I'd love to hear if anybody has a solution that they really like for documentation and stuff, because I've never really loved all the ones I've gotten to use. Arsenis, you had a question. Would you like to unmute and ask that one? And if I can find you, I will help you unmute as well.
Sure. Thanks, Libby. And thanks, Dave, for joining us today, man. At the beginning of your talk earlier today, you actually mentioned something kind of in passing, which was fun projects. You were distinguishing between some of the different types of projects that you have to do. So I'm wondering if you might define what that means for you and what you think it means for a team in general, and how much. So there are two follow-up questions with this. One of them is, how do you determine how much time to allocate for kind of exploration in those fun projects? And can you share an example of a time when you kind of went through one of those with your team?
Yeah, great question. I guess I will define this more as like, I don't know, there's type one fun, type two fun of like, it's maybe not super exciting in the moment, but it is fun in retrospect. I guess there's also type three fun, which is like not fun in the moment, wasn't fun in retrospect either. But I would I would kind of define this more as, I mean, we talked about resource allocation earlier. This is kind of like a skill set resource allocation where your projects that you take on, I think you should always have one project that's playing to your strength, one project that's like maybe a stretch and you're learning something like completely brand new and like trying to develop a new muscle. And then one project that maybe isn't necessarily tied directly to business need, but like could be in the future. And I think that like sometimes those end up paying off the most. And so I think it's less so me being prescriptive of like, this is exactly the type of project that you should do, and more so that you kind of have this like variety of projects going on. So that way, if one really kicks up, maybe you can devote more time towards it. If one is maybe like a little bit dreaded to actually like move forward on, you can have productive procrastination, if you will, by working on these other like passion projects. One thing that we do on my team is actually everybody should have a defined passion project where it is kind of created and shaped by themselves and like exploring new tools that they want. And so one example, I have a team member that's developing an LLM around like public information based on earning calls from our competitors. And so I think that's like kind of a fun project where there's not really like nobody's really asking for it. I think it's a great time to explore how to use these LLMs, and potentially this could end up being something that's like really useful to interface with. But the expectation is that it's more about learning the tool than it is about like the end goal there.
Awesome. Thank you for the question. We have a few questions left and we have 5 minutes left. Let's see if we can get in at least one more. One moment while I sift through questions. Here's a super quick one we can do related to our very earlier conversation. Does your team use DVC or something similar for data version control?
Sorry, DBC. I think I maybe didn't hear that correctly. DBC?
DVC, data version control. I don't
Oh,
know what DVC is.
yeah, we've been more recently exploring within Databricks. We have like Delta tables, which does have kind of some of that baked in capability for versioning. We've done a lot of work on kind of archiving our own data because we get audited quite regularly. But I think archiving is kind of a solved for solution. So rather than us devoting a lot of time towards managing the archive, let's use the tools that like already have this natively built in. I also think that GitHub and GitLab both have like large data file structures that you can save to. For compliance reasons, we haven't really explored that, but yeah, I guess I'll say this might be a little bit more of a blind spot outside of Delta tables for us.
That's okay. Valid question. And anybody in the chat can feel free to throw their answer in as well. I mean, I raised my hand and said, I don't know what DVC is. I don't know what that is. If you were the anonymous asker who asked that, feel free to chime in the chat and add some context and stuff for everybody as well. Okay, let's end on this one. We have 3 minutes left. can you talk a bit more about your pivot from academia into data science? What worked well in that transition? What didn't work so well?
Yeah, I think this is let me first preface this by saying I'm incredibly grateful for a lot of the opportunities that I was like given. So I'm not knocking anything. But I will say that like it was taking a few positions that felt like, kind of within week one, it's like, oh wow, I feel like I could have done this years ago rather than like using an advanced degree for. That's all right. Use that to your advantage. That should give you free time to like start honing in your craft a little bit more in a professional setting. And so I think rather than being bummed out by that, you should be more excited that you now have more free time to develop in a professional setting that you can now add to your resume. So I think that is probably maybe a tough pill to swallow. Maybe that's old, antiquated advice now. I'm not really sure, but that is what worked for me was taking a position to just get your foot in the door and then kind of climbing from there.
Very, very
Yeah.
valid. Let's see. We have 2 minutes left, and if we want to do one more quick advice type one, this is very present for everybody right here, right now. Having a hard time finding opportunities in data science after master's completion. Any advice on where to look?
Yeah, that is a great I mean I feel like that does change pretty regularly. LinkedIn used to be a great spot for that, and I think you can still find opportunities, but I'll be forthright in saying that like I get so many messages, even when I don't have positions open, looking for positions, that it is
Yeah.
hard to kind of stand out. I think things like this are a great way to see what's out there, connect with people, and actually have more of a personal connection with somebody before you apply. I think that's like a phenomenal start. I also think conferences, I'll be at the PositConf here in 2 weeks. That's actually where I first got my job at Centene, just being totally forthright there. That's a good opportunity to meet people, see what they're doing, and then if it's something that you're excited or interested in, give them your contact info. You never know when those things are going to pan out. I met Centene at the conference, and then I think it was like 5 months later, they said, "Hey, we actually have a position open that we think you might be interested in." Turns out I was. But again, I think that goes back to don't burn bridges and just like keep opportunities open because it may surprise you when those actually can kind of come back to you.
Right. Yeah. I was just thinking of Catherine at Centene as well when you said that, because I know for experience that Catherine also got her job from an experience at PositConf. Um, this is one of those things that I keep telling people about the Discord server for PositConf as well, is it's like just because you're attending in person doesn't mean you shouldn't get on the Discord server. Go do that. I have made connections on PositConf Discord servers in the past that have led to my friends getting jobs that they're still in today. It's absolutely wonderful. Go do it. All right, well, it's the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for hanging out with us and asking such great questions. We didn't get to all of them. There were some other ones that were a little too long to answer in the time that we had, but I'm so glad that you all hung out with us. If you would like to save the chat, if there are some resources, anything that you want to save, you can click the little three dots in the top right of the chat. And Dave, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. I hope you had a good time.
It's so much fun. Thank you so much for having me, and it was great to meet you and kind of chat here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And next week, if you hang out with us, we have Mike Thompson, Data Science Manager at Flatiron Health. If you would like to um, join us on our kind of journey, community journey, make friends, make personal connections in the data science space, just like Dave said, this is the place to do it. Go connect with your fellow attendees on LinkedIn, ask them for Zoom chats, and be buddies. All right, I'll see you in 1 week here on Zoom. Goodbye, everybody. Have a fantastic rest of your week and weekend.